The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly across the forward operating base as Sergeant Maya Chun walked toward the supply depot, her standard-issue uniform crisp despite the oppressive desert heat. Her boots crunched against the gravelly sand with measured precision, each step deliberate and controlled. The fabric of her uniform hung loose around her compact frame, designed for functionality rather than form, masking the lean muscle beneath. Three soldiers lounged in the shade of a supply truck, their conversation dying as she approached. Corporal Derek Voss, a mountain of a man with shoulders that strained his uniform seams, nudged his companions with a crooked grin. His eyes tracked her movement with the predatory interest of someone who believed rank meant everything and saw only the sergeant stripes on her sleeve. "What are you doing in our sector, sweetheart?" Voss called out, his voice carrying the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to intimidating others. His buddies, Privates Jake Morrison and Tommy Liu, shifted their positions to form a loose semicircle as she approached. Morrison, tall and wiry with nervous energy, cracked his knuckles while Liu, stocky and barrel-chested, crossed his arms over his chest. Chin stopped 3 feet away, her posture relaxed but alert. "I need to requisition ammunition for training exercises," she replied, her voice steady and professional. Her dark eyes remained fixed on Voss, never wavering despite the obvious attempt at intimidation. "Training exercises," Liu repeated with a snort, nudging Morrison. "What kind of training could you possibly need? Playing soldier in the sandbox." The mockery in his tone hung thick in the desert air, mixing with the smell of diesel, fuel, and hot metal. Chin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained level. "Standard marksmanship qualification," she stated. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She took a step forward, but Voss moved to block her path, his massive frame casting a shadow across her smaller form. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've served or know someone who has faced similar situations in the military. "The depot supervisor is busy," Voss declared, his grin widening to show teeth stained by tobacco. "Might take a while before he can help you out. Maybe you should find something more suitable for someone like you to do around here." His implication hung heavy in the air, the suggestion that she didn't belong echoing in the sudden stillness that had fallen over the area. Chun felt the familiar weight of underestimation settling around her like a suffocating blanket. It was nothing new, this assumption that her gender somehow diminished her capabilities, that her presence in uniform was some kind of administrative error rather than earned placement. Her fingers flexed slightly at her sides, muscle memory from countless hours of training threatening to surface before she consciously relaxed them. The three men seemed to sense her momentary tension, interpreting it as weakness rather than restraint. Morrison stepped closer, his shadow joining Voss's and blocking her path completely. "You know," he said with false concern, "maybe you'd be more comfortable in a different uniform altogether. Something more appropriate for kitchen duty or medical support." The insult hit its mark, but Chin's expression remained unchanged. She had learned long ago that showing emotion in situations like this only emboldened bullies. Instead, she cataloged details with the precision of someone trained to assess threats. Voss favored his right side, probably an old injury. Morrison's stance was unbalanced, weight too far forward. Liu kept glancing toward the main camp, nervous about potential witnesses. "I'll wait for the supervisor," she said simply, moving to step around them. But Voss shifted again, his bulk deliberately intimidating as he loomed over her. His hand moved toward her shoulder, fingers reaching for the fabric of her uniform sleeve. Chin's hand moved with lightning precision, intercepting Voss's wrist before his fingers could make contact with her uniform. Her grip was firm, but not aggressive, a clear message wrapped in restraint. "Don't," she said quietly, her voice carrying a warning that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her slight frame should have allowed. Voss's eyes widened in surprise, not at being stopped, but at the strength in her grip. For a moment, Uncertainty flickered across his features before pride and masculine ego reasserted themselves. He jerked his hand free, his face reddening with embarrassment at being outmaneuvered so easily by someone he'd dismissed as weak. "You think you're tough?" Morrison sneered, stepping closer until his breath was hot against her face. "Let's see how tough you are when we strip that uniform off and send you back where you belong." His hand shot out toward the collar of her shirt, fingers grasping for the fabric. Chun moved like water, flowing away from his grasp, while simultaneously positioning herself so that Lu's advance was blocked by Morrison's own body. The movement was so smooth and practiced that it looked almost accidental, as if she had simply stumbled backward at exactly the right moment. But her feet were planted with perfect balance, her weight distributed with the precision of someone who had spent years mastering the art of combat. Lu tried to circle around, his stocky frame moving with surprising speed, but Chun had already anticipated the maneuver. She shifted her position again, keeping all three men in her line of sight while maintaining enough distance to react to any sudden movements. Her breathing remained controlled, each inhale and exhale measured despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. "Hold her still," Voss commanded, his authority reasserting itself as he rubbed his wrist where her fingers had left invisible impressions. The three men began to coordinate their movements, spreading out to limit her options for escape. Their confidence was returning, bolstered by their numerical advantage and the assumption that strength would ultimately prevail over skill. Chin's dark eyes tracked each of them in turn, cataloging their positions and likely attack patterns with the cool assessment of a predator evaluating prey. But to the casual observer, she appeared to be nothing more than a small woman facing overwhelming odds, her uniform hanging loose around her frame like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. "Come on, sweetheart," Lu taunted, his voice thick with false friendliness. "We just want to see what you're hiding under all that fabric. Maybe you're not even supposed to be wearing that uniform at all. Maybe someone made a mistake when they handed it to you." The words were designed to humiliate, to break down her confidence, and make her feel small and powerless. Chen had heard variations of the same theme countless times throughout her military career, each iteration a reminder that many still saw her presence as an anomaly to be corrected rather than a capability to be respected. Morrison lunged forward, his long arms reaching for her shoulders with the intention of pinning her in place, while his companions moved in. But Chen was no longer where he expected her to be. She had shifted her weight and dropped slightly, turning his momentum against him as he stumbled past her position. Her elbow found his solar plexus with surgical precision, not hard enough to cause serious injury, but sufficient to double him over, gasping for breath. The strike was so quick and subtle that Voss and Lu barely registered what had happened. They saw Morrison stumble and assumed he had simply tripped over his own feet in his eagerness to grab her. Chun straightened slowly, her expression unchanged, as if nothing significant had occurred. "Clumsy," she observed mildly, watching Morrison struggle to regain his composure. "You should be more careful." Her tone carried no mockery, just a simple statement of fact that somehow made the observation more cutting than any insult could have been. Voss's face darkened with rage, his hands clenching into fists as he realized they were being toyed with. This wasn't going according to plan, and his reputation as someone who commanded respect through intimidation was being eroded by a woman half his size who seemed completely unimpressed by his presence. "Enough games," he snarled, stepping forward with the full weight of his authority behind him. His massive hands reached for the front of her uniform shirt, fingers spread wide to grab as much fabric as possible. "Strip her down and let's see what she's really made of." Chin's response was immediate and devastating. As Voss's hands closed around the fabric of her uniform shirt, she trapped his wrists with her own hands, using his forward momentum to pull him off balance while driving her knee upward toward his midsection. The impact folded him in half, his breath exploding outward in a whoosh of surprised agony. But even as Voss doubled over, Chen was already moving. Lu had charged from her left, his thick arms spread wide to tackle her to the ground. She pivoted on her right foot, redirecting his attack so that his shoulder struck the bent-over Voss instead of her. The two men crashed together in a tangle of limbs and curses, their coordination shattered by her precise manipulation of their positions. Morrison, having finally recovered from her earlier strike, approached more cautiously from behind. His hands reached for the back of her collar, fingers seeking to grab the fabric and tear it away from her shoulders. Chun sensed his presence without turning, her peripheral vision and spatial awareness honed by years of training in environments where a moment's inattention could prove fatal. She spun with fluid grace, her left hand deflecting his grasp, while her right palm struck his chest with enough force to send him staggering backward. The blow was controlled, calculated to disable rather than destroy, but Morrison felt the power behind it like a sledgehammer wrapped in silk. He stumbled against the supply truck, his eyes wide with growing realization that this was not the helpless victim they had expected. "What the hell?" Morrison gasped, clutching his chest where her palm had connected. His voice carried a note of genuine fear for the first time since the confrontation began. The casual arrogance that had defined his approach was cracking, replaced by the dawning understanding that they had severely misjudged their target. Voss struggled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and pain. Rage burned in his eyes as he watched Chun stand calmly in the center of their failed attack, her uniform barely disheveled despite their combined efforts. The fabric remained intact, protecting whatever secrets lay beneath, but more importantly, protecting her dignity from their crude attempts at humiliation. "You little witch," Voss snarled, spitting dust from his mouth. His massive frame shook with fury as he realized how easily she had neutralized their numerical advantage. "We'll see how smart you are when we get these clothes off you properly." His hands moved to his belt, fingers working at the buckle with threatening intent. Chen's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in her posture. The casual alertness was replaced by a coiled tension, like a spring compressed to its breaking point. Her weight settled onto the balls of her feet, her arms hanging loose at her sides in a deceptively relaxed position that masked the lethal potential of her training. Lou had regained his footing, wiping blood from a split lip where he had collided with Voss. His stocky frame was built for power rather than finesse, but he had enough combat experience to recognize that their initial assessment had been catastrophically wrong. This woman wasn't just lucky or desperate. She was trained. She knows how to fight. He warned his companions, his voice carrying a grudging respect that hadn't been there before. But Voss was beyond reason, his masculine pride wounded by the public humiliation of being outmaneuvered by someone he considered beneath him. "I don't care if she's a black belt," Voss declared, advancing with renewed determination. 3 against 1, and we're going to strip that uniform off piece by piece. His hands reached for her again, but this time his approach was more methodical, more careful. Chin allowed him to come closer, her dark eyes tracking his movement with the patient focus of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The desert wind picked up slightly, stirring the loose fabric of her uniform and carrying with it the scent of heated metal and diesel fuel that permeated the forward operating base. As Voss's fingers made contact with her sleeve, Chin's hand shot out to intercept his wrist once again. But this time, instead of simply stopping his advance, she twisted his arm with precise leverage, forcing him to turn away from her or risk having his shoulder dislocated. The movement exposed his back to her, and her free hand struck between his shoulder blades with surgical accuracy. The blow targeted a specific nerve cluster, sending waves of numbness down his right arm. Voss stumbled forward, his dominant hand suddenly weak and unresponsive. The technique was subtle enough that observers might have thought she had simply pushed him, but the effect was unmistakably professional. The numbness spreading through Voss's arm sent a jolt of panic through his system. He flexed his fingers desperately, trying to restore feeling to his dominant hand while his companions regrouped behind him. The casual nature of their assault was evaporating, replaced by a grim determination that bordered on desperation. Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead, his nervous energy now channeled into focused aggression. "We do this together," he called to the others. "No more playing around." His lanky frame coiled with tension as he positioned himself to Chen's right, while Lu moved to her left in a coordinated pincer movement. Chen rotated slowly, keeping all three men in her field of vision while maintaining perfect balance on the balls of her feet. Her breathing remained controlled, each inhalation deliberate and measured despite the escalating violence of the situation. The loose fabric of her uniform rippled slightly in the desert breeze, concealing the precise positioning of her limbs. Lu charged first, his stocky frame driving forward with the momentum of a battering ram. His thick arms spread wide to grapple her to the ground, where his superior weight and strength would presumably give him an advantage. But Chen had already read his intentions in the subtle shift of his shoulders, the telltale lean that preceded his attack. She dropped low and to her left, allowing his momentum to carry him past her position while her leg swept out to catch his ankles. Lu crashed to the ground in a cloud of dust, his pride as bruised as his knees. Before he could regain his footing, Chen was already moving to counter Morrison's simultaneous assault from her opposite flank. Morrison had learned from watching his companion's failures. Instead of grabbing for her uniform directly, he aimed for her wrists, seeking to control her hands and neutralize the precise strikes that had been so effective. His long fingers closed around her left wrist with surprising speed, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "Got you," he declared, using his height advantage to pull her arm upward and off balance. But his victory lasted only seconds before Chen's response demonstrated why hand control was a double-edged weapon. If he could grab her, she could grab him back. Her free hand clamped down on his wrist with crushing force, her thumb finding the pressure point that would send lightning bolts of pain up his arm. Morrison's grip loosened involuntarily as his nervous system registered the targeted attack, and Chen twisted free while simultaneously driving her elbow into his solar plexus for the second time in their encounter. This blow was harder than before, carrying with it the accumulated frustration of dealing with their persistent harassment. Morrison folded like a broken accordion, gasping for breath that wouldn't come while his knees buckled beneath him. His attempt to control her had backfired spectacularly, leaving him more vulnerable than before. Voss had been flexing his numb fingers, trying to restore circulation and strength to his compromised arm. Feeling was beginning to return, along with a burning determination to end this humiliation once and for all. His massive frame trembled with barely controlled rage as he watched his subordinates being systematically dismantled by someone he still refused to acknowledge as a legitimate threat. "Enough!" he roared, his voice carrying across the supply depot with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. His good arm reached for the front of Chen's uniform shirt, fingers spread wide to grab as much fabric as possible. This time there would be no finesse, no careful maneuvering. Raw strength would triumph where tactics had failed. Chen allowed him to make contact with her uniform, her dark eyes tracking his movement with the cold calculation of a chess master several moves ahead of her opponent. As his fingers closed around the fabric, she stepped forward rather than away, moving inside his reach where his size advantage became a liability rather than an asset. Her hands found his belt, not to remove it, but to use it as an anchor point for the hip throw that followed. Voss's own momentum, combined with her precise application of leverage, sent his massive frame tumbling through the air. He landed hard on his back, the impact driving the breath from his lungs and sending up a cloud of dust that settled slowly in the still air. The throw had been executed with textbook precision, the kind of technique that required thousands of hours of practice to perform under pressure. Lu, struggling to his feet from his earlier fall, paused in amazement at the sight of his superior officer lying sprawled in the dirt like a discarded toy. "Where did you learn a fight like that?" Lu asked, genuine curiosity overriding his previous hostility. The question hung in the desert air like a challenge, demanding an explanation for skills that far exceeded anything they had expected from a standard infantry sergeant. Chen straightened her uniform with calm efficiency, her movements precise and economical. The fabric had been pulled and twisted during the confrontation, but remained intact and properly positioned. Her hands smoothed down any wrinkles with the automatic gesture of someone who took pride in military bearing regardless of circumstances. Chun regarded Lu's question with the same measured calm she had maintained throughout the confrontation. Her dark eyes held depths that suggested experiences far beyond the standard infantry training these men assumed she possessed. The desert wind stirred the fabric of her uniform, and for a moment, the loose sleeve shifted to reveal a hint of dark ink on her upper arm before settling back into place. "That's classified," she replied simply, her voice carrying an authority that made Lu take an unconscious step backward. The single word held weight, implications that suggested levels of clearance and operations that existed in shadows these men would never glimpse. Voss struggled to his feet, his massive frame moving with less confidence than before. The precision of that hip throw had shaken him more than the physical impact. He had been in enough fights to recognize the difference between lucky desperation and professional competence. This woman possessed skills that took years to develop and maintain. Morrison remained doubled over, his breathing slowly returning to normal as the effects of her elbow strike gradually subsided. His lanky frame shook slightly, whether from pain or the growing realization that they had made a catastrophic error in judgment. He glanced between his companions, seeking reassurance that never came. "You're not regular infantry," Lu stated, his voice carrying a mix of respect and wariness that hadn't been there at the beginning of their encounter. His stocky frame remained tense, ready to defend himself, but no longer eager to attack. The casual arrogance that had defined their initial approach had been systematically dismantled along with their coordinated assault. Chin's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes at Lu's observation. A memory, perhaps, or an acknowledgement of truths that couldn't be spoken in present company. Her hands remained at her sides, relaxed but ready, maintaining the perfect balance between apparent calm and instant readiness. Voss flexed his fingers, testing the returning sensation in his previously numbed arm. His pride demanded that he reassert his dominance, but tactical wisdom whispered warnings about engaging an opponent whose capabilities remained largely unknown. The uniform she wore told only part of the story, and clearly not the most important part. "I don't care what kind of training you have," he declared, though his voice lacked the absolute confidence it had carried earlier. His eyes narrowed as he studied her stance, looking for weaknesses or tells that might give him an advantage in a renewed assault. "We came here to strip that uniform off you, and that's what we're going to do." The threat hung in the air like heat shimmer, distorting reality around the edges while the core remained brutally clear. Chin's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, weight settling more firmly onto her back foot, while her hands assumed positions that appeared casual but provided optimal reaction times for multiple defensive options. Morrison finally straightened, his breathing restored enough to speak. "Maybe we should just walk away," he suggested quietly, his nervous energy now channeled into survival instinct rather than aggression. His long frame seemed to fold in on itself as he contemplated the wisdom of continued confrontation with someone who had already proven superior to their combined efforts. "Walk away," Voss repeated, his tone dripping with contempt. From her, his massive frame swelled with renewed determination, masculine pride overriding tactical assessment in a display of ego that would have been admirable if it weren't so foolish. No one walks away from Derek Voss, especially not some pretend soldier playing dress-up. The insult was designed to provoke, to goad Chun into an emotional response that might create exploitable openings in her otherwise flawless defensive positioning. But her expression remained unchanged, her dark eyes tracking his movements with the patient focus of someone accustomed to waiting for exactly the right moment to act. Lu positioned himself to Voss's left, his earlier reluctance overcome by loyalty to his superior and the ingrained military hierarchy that demanded support for chain of command regardless of personal reservations. His stocky frame coiled with tension as he prepared for what might be their final coordinated assault. The three men began to spread out again, their formation more cautious now, but no less determined. They had learned painful lessons about underestimating their opponent, but the fundamental equation remained unchanged in their minds. 3 against 1, size and strength against whatever exotic training she possessed. Chen rotated slowly to keep all three in her field of vision, her movements fluid and economical. The loose fabric of her uniform rippled with each subtle adjustment of position, and again the sleeve shifted slightly, revealing another glimpse of the dark tattoo that remained hidden beneath the regulation fabric. This time, Morrison caught the flash of ink on her arm. His eyes widened as pattern recognition triggered memories of briefings and whispered conversations about units that operated beyond the normal military structure. Elite formations that left their mark on those who survived their selection processes. "Wait," Morrison called out, his voice cracking with sudden uncertainty. His lanky frame, tensed as possibilities he had never considered, began to coalesce into terrifying probability. "Guys, look at her arm." Morrison's warning caused both Voss and Liu to pause, their attention shifting to where he was pointing with a trembling finger. Chen's sleeve had ridden up slightly during the confrontation, revealing a portion of intricate black ink that curved around her upper arm like a serpent made of shadow and meaning. "What is it?" Liu demanded, squinting through the desert heat haze to make out the details of what had captured Morrison's attention. His stocky frame remained coiled for action, but uncertainty was beginning to creep into his posture as he studied the partial tattoo visible beneath the shifted fabric. Chen noticed their focus and made a subtle adjustment to her sleeve, pulling the fabric down to cover the exposed ink. But the movement was too late and too deliberate, confirming that whatever they had glimpsed was significant enough to warrant concealment. Her dark eyes tracked their reactions with the cool assessment of someone calculating rapidly changing tactical parameters. Voss stepped closer, his massive frame moving with renewed purpose but tempered now by curiosity rather than blind aggression. His earlier defeats had taught him caution, but this new development offered possibilities that his ego desperately wanted to explore. "Show us what you're hiding under there," he ordered, his voice carrying official authority despite the illegal nature of their harassment. "That's not happening," Chen replied flatly, her tone carrying finality that brooked no argument. Her hands moved to ensure her sleeves remained properly positioned, the gesture both protective and subtly threatening. The simple act of adjusting her uniform somehow conveyed more menace than any overtly aggressive posture could have managed. Morrison's nervous energy had transformed into something approaching panic as his mind raced through possibilities. Military tattoos weren't uncommon, but something about the design he had glimpsed triggered memories of classified briefings and whispered stories about units that operated in darkness beyond the reach of normal command structures. "I think I know what that is," Morrison said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the desert wind. His lanky frame seemed to shrink as the implications of his suspicion settled into his consciousness like lead weights. His companions turned toward him, seeking explanation for the fear that was written clearly across his features. Liu's expression shifted from curiosity to concern as he registered Morrison's obvious distress. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his own voice dropping to match Morrison's subdued tone. The casual atmosphere of harassment and intimidation was evaporating, replaced by something heavier and more dangerous. Chun remained motionless, but her attention focused entirely on Morrison as she waited to see how much he actually knew versus how much he was guessing. Her breathing remained controlled, but there was a new quality to her stillness, like a predator deciding whether to flee or eliminate a threat to its safety. "Some units mark their people," Morrison continued, his words coming slowly as he fought against training that emphasized operational security above all else. "Special operations. The kind of soldiers who don't exist on paper and don't follow normal rules of engagement." His eyes remained fixed on Chen's concealed arm, as if he could penetrate the fabric through sheer force of will. Voss's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching respect tinged with wariness. His masculine pride still demanded that he complete what they had started, but tactical awareness was beginning to override emotional impulses. If Morrison's suspicions were correct, they weren't dealing with a standard infantry sergeant who happened to know some hand-to-hand combat techniques. "You're talking about Death Brigade," Lou said suddenly, the words escaping before he could stop them. His stocky frame went rigid as the name hung in the air like an unexploded ordnance, dangerous and unpredictable. Stories about that unit were passed around in whispers, tales of operations that never happened and soldiers who didn't officially exist. Chin's reaction was minimal but unmistakable. A slight tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible shift in her stance that suggested Lou's guess had struck uncomfortably close to the truth. She said nothing, but her silence carried more weight than any denial could have managed. The Death Brigade was legend within certain military circles, a unit so classified that most soldiers weren't even sure it existed. Those who claimed knowledge spoke of selection processes that broke more candidates than they graduated, of operations conducted in places that didn't appear on any map, of soldiers who returned from missions fundamentally changed by experiences they could never discuss. "Show us the tattoo," Voss demanded, but his voice lacked the casual arrogance it had carried earlier. Now, there was genuine command authority behind the words, the kind of tone used when military necessity overrode personal considerations. "If you're really one of them, prove it." Chin's dark eyes met his gaze steadily, and for a moment the desert heat seemed to intensify around them. Her hand moved slowly toward her sleeve, fingers grasping the fabric with deliberate precision. The movement was controlled, calculated to build tension while maintaining the element of choice in revelation. Chin's fingers paused at her sleeve, the fabric gathered in her grip as she weighed the consequences of revelation against the alternatives. The desert wind picked up slightly, stirring dust devils in the space between them, while the three men waited with growing anticipation. Her dark eyes held depths that spoke of decisions made in darkness, of choices that carried life and death consequences far beyond this moment of harassment turned recognition. The tattoo beneath her sleeve was more than ink and skin. It was a badge of survival, a mark earned through trials that broke most candidates before they reached completion. Every line had meaning, every curve told a story of operations that officially never happened and comrades who died in places that didn't appear on maps. To reveal, it was to expose herself to scrutiny she had spent months avoiding. "You want to see it," Chin said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made all three men straighten instinctively. Her tone held the same controlled authority that had marked her responses throughout their confrontation, but now it carried undertones of something darker and more dangerous. "Then you better be prepared for what comes after." Lou swallowed hard, his stocky frame tensing as he began to understand that they had crossed a threshold from which there might be no return. Military hierarchy was about to be redefined in ways that their training manual had never covered. His eyes darted between his companions, seeking reassurance that none of them could provide. Morrison's nervous energy had transformed into something approaching terror as the implications of their situation became clearer. They had attempted to strip the uniform from someone whose very existence was classified at levels that exceeded their security clearance. The kind of mistake that ended careers and sometimes lives, depending on what operational secrets might be compromised. "Just show us," Voss demanded, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. His massive frame remained imposing, but authority was shifting in ways that size and rank couldn't control. Whatever was hidden beneath that sleeve would determine the outcome of more than just their confrontation. Chin's grip tightened on the fabric, her knuckles showing white against the desert-tanned skin of her hand. The decision hung in the balance for another heartbeat before she began to roll up her sleeve with deliberate precision. Each inch of exposed skin revealed more of the intricate design that marked her as something beyond their previous understanding. The tattoo emerged like a revelation written in black ink and symbolic meaning. A stylized skull crowned with thorns wrapped around her upper arm, its empty sockets seeming to stare directly at whoever viewed it. Below the skull, crossed daggers dripped with what appeared to be blood, but was actually more thorns, creating a pattern that seemed to move in the flickering desert light. But it was the text beneath the imagery that caused all three men to take involuntary steps backward. Death Brigade was etched in Gothic script around the base of the design, with Roman numerals indicating operational deployments that spoke of years spent in hell. Below that, smaller text in a language none of them recognized completed the design with words that carried weight beyond translation. "Holy shit," Morrison breathed, his voice barely audible above the desert wind. His lanky frame began to shake as the full magnitude of their mistake became clear. They hadn't been harassing a standard infantry sergeant. They had been attempting to strip the uniform from one of the most elite soldiers in the military, someone whose training exceeded anything they could imagine. Lou's face had gone pale beneath his desert tan, sweat beading on his forehead despite the dry heat. The stories he had heard about Death Brigade recruitment suddenly seemed less like legend and more like understatement. Selection rates that made other special forces look like basic training, casualty rates that were classified but rumored to approach 50% during the initial phases. Voss stared at the tattoo with a mixture of awe and growing dread. His earlier confidence had evaporated like water on hot sand, replaced by the cold realization that they had committed what amounted to assault against someone whose response options extended far beyond normal military justice. Death Brigade operators were authorized to use whatever force necessary to protect operational security. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, filled with implications and consequences that none of them had considered when this confrontation began. Chun allowed the tattoo to remain visible, letting them absorb the full impact of what they were seeing. The ink seemed to writhe in the desert heat, creating an optical illusion that made the skull appear to grin with predatory satisfaction. "Now you know," Chun said simply, her voice carrying the finality of judgment pronounced. Her dark eyes moved from one man to the next, cataloging their reactions and calculating their potential responses to this new information. The tactical situation had shifted completely, but the physical confrontation was far from over. Morrison took another step backward, his survival instincts finally overriding the masculine pride that had driven their initial assault. "We should go," he said urgently, his voice cracking with stress. "Right now, before this gets any worse." His nervous energy was now completely focused on escape rather than aggression. But Voss remained rooted in place, his massive frame trembling with conflicting impulses. Military hierarchy demanded respect for elite units, but his wounded pride refused to accept defeat at the hands of someone he had dismissed as inferior. The internal battle was written clearly across his features as ego warred with wisdom. Voss's internal struggle played out across his features like a storm gathering strength on the horizon. His massive hands clenched and unclenched at his sides while his eyes remained fixed on the Death Brigade tattoo that had transformed their entire understanding of the situation. Pride and survival instinct warred within him, each demanding contradictory responses to a threat he had never anticipated. "I don't care what unit you're from," he declared finally, though his voice carried forced bravado rather than genuine confidence. His words rang hollow in the desert air, contradicted by the slight tremor in his hands and the way his eyes kept darting to the skull design that seemed to mock his defiance. "You're still just one person, and we're still three." Morrison's face went white at his superior's declaration, horror replacing the relief he had felt when he thought they might escape this situation with their careers intact. "Are you insane?" he hissed, his nervous energy now completely focused on damage control rather than aggression. "Do you have any idea what happens to people who assault Death Brigade operatives?" Lou remained frozen in place, his stocky frame caught between loyalty to his commanding officer and the growing certainty that continued aggression would result in consequences far beyond their ability to handle. Sweat dripped from his forehead despite the dry heat, each drop marking another second of hesitation in a situation that demanded immediate decision. Chen observed their discord with the detached interest of a professional evaluating tactical options. Her sleeve remained rolled up, the tattoo fully visible as a reminder of capabilities they were only beginning to comprehend. The skull's empty sockets seemed to track their movements, while the thorned crown caught the desert light in ways that made the entire design appear alive with malevolent purpose. "Your choice," she said simply, her voice carrying the same measured calm that had marked her responses throughout the confrontation. But the words held undertones of finality that suggested patience was not unlimited and consequences were approaching like an incoming storm. Her hands remained at her sides, relaxed but ready for whatever decision they reached. Voss took a step forward, his massive frame moving with the determination of someone who had pushed past rational thought into the realm of pure masculine stubbornness. Military hierarchy meant nothing if he couldn't maintain dominance over someone he perceived as smaller and weaker, regardless of what tattoo she carried or what training she claimed. "Special forces or not, you're coming out of that uniform," he growled, his voice dropping to a threatening rumble that had intimidated countless subordinates throughout his military career. His hands moved toward her again, fingers spread wide to grab and tear at the fabric that concealed whatever other secrets might be hidden beneath. Chen's response was immediate and devastating in its precision. As his hands closed around the collar of her shirt, she stepped into his attack rather than away from it, moving inside his reach where his size became a liability. Her right hand found the nerve cluster at the base of his neck, while her left struck his wrist with enough force to numb his entire arm. Voss's grip loosened involuntarily as electrical fire shot through his nervous system, but Chen wasn't finished with her demonstration. Her knee drove upward into his solar plexus with surgical accuracy, targeting the nerve bundle that would paralyze his diaphragm and leave him gasping for breath that wouldn't come. The big man doubled over, his face turning red, then purple as his respiratory system struggled to function. She maintained her grip on his neck, applying pressure to specific points that would keep him conscious, but helpless, unable to breathe properly or coordinate his movements effectively. "This is what Death Brigade training looks like," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the supply depot with clinical precision. Her dark eyes remained fixed on Liu and Morrison while her hands maintained their devastating hold on their superior officer. Years of learning how to disable opponents without killing them, how to extract information or simply demonstrate superiority. Morrison had backed away until his shoulders pressed against the supply truck, his lanky frame shaking with the realization that they were witnessing a master class in applied violence. The casual efficiency with which she had neutralized Voss spoke of training that went far beyond anything they had imagined possible. Liu stood paralyzed by indecision, watching his commanding officer being systematically dismantled by someone half his size. The techniques she was using weren't standard military hand-to-hand combat. They were something darker and more specialized, designed for situations where normal rules of engagement didn't apply. Voss struggled weakly in her grip, his massive strength negated by precise application of leverage and anatomical knowledge. His face was beginning to show signs of oxygen deprivation, but Chen maintained just enough pressure to keep him conscious and aware of his helplessness without causing permanent damage. "Let him go," Liu pleaded, his voice cracking with stress as he watched his superior officer being reduced to a gasping, helpless burden in her hands. "We'll leave. We'll forget this ever happened. Just let him breathe." Chen's dark eyes evaluated his sincerity, weighing his promise against the tactical realities of their situation. The tattoo on her exposed arm seemed to pulse with its own life, the skull's grin widening as if pleased by the demonstration of skills that had been earned through trials these men could never imagine surviving. Chen's grip on Voss's neck remained steady while her dark eyes evaluated Liu's desperate plea for mercy. The big man's struggles had weakened considerably as oxygen deprivation began to affect his coordination, but she maintained just enough pressure to keep him conscious and fully aware of his helplessness. The demonstration was as much psychological warfare as physical dominance. "You'll forget this happened. Chin repeated Lu's words with clinical precision, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the difference between promises made under duress and actual compliance. Her fingers adjusted slightly on Voss's pressure points, causing him to gasp and convulse in her grip like a fish pulled from water. The sound of approaching footsteps across the gravel interrupted the tense standoff, boots crunching with a measured cadence of someone in authority. All eyes turned toward the supply depot entrance where Master Sergeant Rodriguez appeared, his weathered face taking in the scene with a practiced assessment of someone who had spent decades managing military personnel. "What the hell is going on here?" Rodriguez demanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made subordinates straighten instinctively. His eyes moved from Morrison pressed against the truck to Lu frozen in place to Voss gasping helplessly in Chin's professional hold. The tableau spoke volumes about a situation that had escalated far beyond normal military discipline. Chin released her grip on Voss immediately, stepping back as the big man collapsed to his knees, clutching his throat and drawing ragged breaths. Her movements were smooth and controlled, transitioning from combat readiness to respectful attention in the space of a heartbeat. The tattoo remained visible on her exposed arm, its intricate design catching Rodriguez's attention immediately. "Master Sergeant," she said formally, her voice returning to the professional tone she had maintained before the confrontation began. "These men were attempting to forcibly remove my uniform. I was defending myself using appropriate force measures." Rodriguez's eyes widened as he recognized the Death Brigade insignia, his expression shifting from irritation at disrupted discipline to something approaching all mixed with concern. His own military experience had included enough classified briefings to understand exactly what that tattoo represented and the implications of the situation he had discovered. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper as the full magnitude of what had almost occurred settled into his consciousness. His weathered features showed the kind of respect reserved for combat veterans whose service records were written in classified ink and sealed away from public scrutiny. Morrison found his voice first, desperation overriding military protocol as he sought to minimize his involvement in what was rapidly becoming a career-ending incident. "She attacked us, Master Sergeant. We were just trying to requisition supplies when she went crazy and started using some kind of martial arts on us." The lie hung in the desert air like heat shimmer, distorting reality around the edges while leaving the core truth brutally exposed. Rodriguez's expression darkened as he processed Morrison's attempted deception, his experience with military investigations making him skeptical of any narrative that painted 3 men as victims of assault by 1 woman. Chin's sleeve remained rolled up, the Death Brigade tattoo serving as silent testimony to capabilities that made Morrison's version of events implausible at best. The skull design seemed to grin with predatory satisfaction as Rodriguez's eyes moved from the intricate ink work to the 3 men who showed clear signs of having been systematically outfought. "Is that what happened, Sergeant Shun?" Rodriguez asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. His weathered hands remained clasped behind his back in a parade rest position that somehow conveyed more menace than any aggressive posture could have managed. "No, Master Sergeant," Chin replied with the same measured calm that had marked her responses throughout the confrontation. "These men attempted to forcibly strip my uniform after making inappropriate comments about my gender and fitness for military service. I defended myself using minimum necessary force." Voss had regained enough breath to speak, though his voice remained hoarse from the pressure she had applied to his throat. His massive frame trembled with a combination of oxygen debt and wounded pride as he struggled to reassert some semblance of authority over the situation that had spiraled completely beyond his control. "She's lying," he gasped, his words coming in short bursts between labored breaths. "We were just having a conversation when she attacked us. Look what she did to me. This is assault on a superior officer." Rodriguez's eyes moved to the Death Brigade tattoo again, his expression becoming increasingly grim as he contemplated the administrative nightmare that would result from this incident. Sexual harassment charges, assault allegations, and the involvement of a classified special operations unit created a perfect storm of military justice complications. Lou remained silent, his stocky frame frozen between loyalty to his companions and the growing certainty that continued deception would only make their situation worse. The truth was written in the positioning of the participants, in the clinical efficiency of Chen's defensive posture, and most importantly in the skull crown tattoo that marked her as someone whose training exceeded anything they possessed. The desert wind picked up slightly, stirring dust devils around their feet while Rodriguez weighed his options. Military justice demanded thorough investigation, but the involvement of Death Brigade personnel meant that certain aspects of any official inquiry would be classified beyond his clearance level. Rodriguez's weathered features hardened as he processed the competing narratives and the physical evidence before him. 3 men showing signs of systematic defeat. 1 woman standing calmly with a Death Brigade tattoo visible on her exposed arm, and a story that strained credibility beyond the breaking point. His decades of military experience had taught him to recognize truth regardless of rank or gender. "Corporal Voss," he said formally, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "You're telling me that Sergeant Shun, who appears to weigh about half what you do, somehow managed to assault all 3 of you simultaneously while you were simply having a conversation about supply requisitions?" The question hung in the desert air like an accusation, its implications clear to everyone present. Voss's massive frame trembled with the effort of maintaining his deception while his throat still bore the invisible marks of Chen's precise pressure point techniques. His earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by the desperate scramble of someone whose lies were collapsing under scrutiny. "That's exactly what happened," Voss insisted, though his voice lacked conviction and his eyes couldn't meet Rodriguez's steady gaze. His massive hands gestured weakly toward Shun, seeking to portray her as the aggressor despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. She used some kind of dirty fighting techniques, stuff that isn't supposed to be taught in basic training. Rodriguez's expression shifted to something approaching contempt as he recognized the attempted manipulation. "Dirty fighting techniques," he repeated slowly, his tone making the words sound ridiculous. "You mean combat skills taught to elite special operations personnel? The kind of training that cost the military millions of dollars and years of specialized instruction." Chun remained at attention, her posture perfectly military despite the confrontation that had just concluded. Her sleeve remained rolled up, the Death Brigade tattoo serving as silent testimony to capabilities that exceeded anything these men had imagined possible. The skull design seemed to watch Rodriguez with hollow approval as he began to piece together the true sequence of events. Morrison's nervous energy had transformed into barely controlled panic as he realized their deception was failing spectacularly. His lanky frame shook with the understanding that they had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, committed acts that would follow them for the remainder of their military careers and possibly beyond. "Master Sergeant," Morrison said desperately, his voice cracking with stress, "we didn't know about her background. If we had known she was special operations, none of this would have happened. It was just a misunderstanding." The admission hung between them like a confession, acknowledging that their treatment of Chun had been predicated on assumptions about her capabilities and status. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed as he processed the implications of Morrison's words, the casual admission that they had felt entitled to harass someone they perceived as inferior. "So you're telling me that you would have treated Sergeant Chun with respect if you had known about her Death Brigade service?" Rodriguez said slowly, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. "But because you assumed she was just regular infantry, you felt justified in whatever behavior led to this confrontation." Lou finally found his voice, desperation overriding his previous paralysis as the magnitude of their situation became clear. "We made a mistake, Master Sergeant. We were wrong about everything. If you could just let this slide, we promise it won't happen again." The plea fell flat in the desert air, carrying no weight against the evidence of systematic harassment and attempted assault that Rodriguez could read in the positioning of the participants and the clinical efficiency of Chen's responses. His military experience included enough similar incidents to recognize the pattern of behavior that had led to this confrontation. Rodriguez turned his attention to Chen, his weathered features showing the respect due to someone whose service record was written in classified operations and sealed away from normal scrutiny. His own combat experience had included enough contact with special operations personnel to understand the selection processes and training regimens that produced Death Brigade operatives. "Sergeant Chen," he said formally, his voice carrying the deference appropriate to someone whose capabilities exceeded normal military parameters. "Do you require medical attention, and do you wish to file formal charges against these men for their actions?" Chen's dark eyes moved from Rodriguez to each of the three men in turn, cataloging their fear and desperation while weighing her options. The tattoo on her exposed arm caught the desert light, its intricate design seeming to pulse with life as she considered the consequences of official action versus the alternatives available to someone with her training and clearance. The question of charges carried implications that extended far beyond normal military justice. Sexual harassment, attempted assault, and interference with classified personnel created a matrix of potential consequences that could end careers and result in criminal prosecution, depending on how thoroughly the investigation proceeded. Voss had regained enough composure to recognize the gravity of their situation, his massive frame no longer trembling with oxygen debt, but with the growing realization that his actions had created consequences far beyond his ability to control or influence. His earlier arrogance had been completely stripped away, replaced by the desperate hope that mercy might be possible. The desert wind stirred around them, carrying the scent of heated metal and diesel fuel that permeated the forward operating base, while the participants in this drama waited for Chen's decision about their immediate futures. Chen's silence stretched across the supply depot like a taut wire, each second marking another moment of suspended judgment for the three men whose futures hung in the balance. Her dark eyes held depths that spoke of decisions made in darkness, of operations where justice was swift and final, and of a training that had prepared her for situations far more complex than military harassment tribunals. The Death Brigade tattoo seemed to writhe in the desert heat, its skull design grinning with predatory satisfaction, while the thorn crown caught the light in ways that made the entire piece appear alive with malevolent purpose. Rodriguez waited respectfully for her response, understanding that someone with her clearance level operated under rules that differed significantly from standard military protocol. "I appreciate the offer, Master Sergeant," Chen said finally, her voice carrying the measured calm that had marked her responses throughout the confrontation. "But I think these men have learned something valuable today about making assumptions based on appearance and gender." Her eyes moved to each of them in turn, cataloging their fear and desperation with clinical precision. Voss's massive frame sagged with relief so profound that his knees nearly buckled beneath him. The reprieve was more mercy than he had dared hope for, given the magnitude of their attempted assault and the implications of harassing classified personnel. His throat still ached from her precise pressure point techniques, a physical reminder of capabilities he had never imagined possible. However, Chun continued, her tone carrying undertones that made all three men tense with renewed apprehension. "This incident will be noted in my personal files, along with detailed descriptions of each participant and their actions. Should any similar situations arise in the future, this documentation will be available to relevant authorities." The warning carried weight that extended far beyond normal military discipline. Death Brigade personnel maintained their own systems of record-keeping and justice, operating under protocols that civilian courts and standard military tribunals rarely glimpsed. Rodriguez nodded his understanding, recognizing the implications of unofficial oversight that could prove more devastating than formal charges. Morrison's nervous energy had transformed in a profound gratitude, mixed with terror at how close they had come to consequences that might have extended far beyond their military careers. His lanky frame remained pressed against the supply truck, as if seeking shelter from scrutiny that could destroy lives with clinical efficiency. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the desert wind. The words carried genuine remorse along with relief, acknowledging both mercy received and lessons learned through near-catastrophic experience. His eyes remained fixed on the ground, unable to meet Chen's steady gaze. Liu found his voice next, his stocky frame straightening as he attempted to restore some semblance of military bearing despite the humiliation of their systematic defeat. "We understand, Sergeant Chen. This was a mistake that won't be repeated by any of us." His words carried the weight of someone who had glimpsed consequences far beyond his previous understanding. Rodriguez observed the exchange with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed justice served without the need for formal proceedings that might have created classified complications extending far beyond the immediate participants. His weathered features showed approval for Chen's handling of the situation, recognizing both mercy and strategic thinking in her decision. Chen rolled down her sleeve with deliberate precision, covering the Death Brigade tattoo that had transformed their understanding of her capabilities and status. The skull design disappeared beneath regulation fabric, but its implications remained embedded in the consciousness of everyone who had witnessed its revelation. The lesson had been delivered with surgical precision. "Gentlemen," Rodriguez addressed the three men with formal authority that brooked no argument. "You will return to your duties and conduct yourselves in accordance with military regulations and basic human decency. Any deviation from exemplary behavior will result in immediate disciplinary action without consideration for circumstances or explanations." The dismissal was clear and final, carrying the weight of someone who would be monitoring their future conduct with particular attention. Voss, Morrison, and Liu began to withdraw from the supply depot, their movements careful and respectful as they processed the magnitude of what they had experienced and barely survived. As they departed, Rodriguez turned his attention back to Chen, his expression shifting to show the genuine respect due to someone whose service record was written in classified operations and sealed away from normal scrutiny. His own combat experience included enough contact with special forces to understand the selection processes that produced Death Brigade operatives. "Sergeant Chen," he said formally, his voice carrying deference that acknowledged capabilities far beyond normal military parameters. "Your requisition for training ammunition will be processed immediately with priority status. No dilas, no complications." The professional courtesy was both practical recognition of her elite status and acknowledgement that harassment of classified personnel created administrative complications that were better avoided through prevention than correction. Chen nodded her acceptance, understanding the subtext that her presence at the base would be noted and respected by competent authority. The desert wind continued to stir around them, carrying the familiar sense of heated metal and diesel fuel that permeated forward operating bases throughout the region. But the atmosphere had changed fundamentally, transformed by the revelation of hidden capabilities and the demonstration of skills that existed far beyond normal military training. Chen's uniform hung properly once again, concealing the tattoo that had changed everything while maintaining the professional appearance that marked her as someone who took pride in military bearing regardless of circumstances. The fabric showed no signs of the attempted assault, protected by training and capabilities that had proven more than adequate for the situation. The supply depot supervisor emerged from the air-conditioned interior just as Rodriguez was completing the ammunition requisition with unprecedented efficiency. Staff Sergeant Williams wiped sweat from his brow, unaware of the dramatic confrontation that had just concluded in the shadow of his facility. His casual demeanor shifted immediately upon recognizing the tension that lingered in the desert air like the aftermath of a thunderstorm. "Everything all right out here, Master Sergeant?" Williams asked, his eyes moving between Rodriguez and Chen while noting the conspicuous absence of the three soldiers who had been loitering near his depot all afternoon. The sudden quiet felt charged with unspoken significance that made his administrative instincts trigger warnings about situations requiring careful documentation. Rodriguez's weathered features arranged themselves into the neutral expression of someone who had witnessed events that would remain officially unreported but privately remembered. Just a minor disciplinary matter, Staff Sergeant. Sergeant Chen's ammunition requisition takes priority processing. No delays or complications. The emphasis on priority processing carried weight that Williams recognized immediately, indicating involvement of personnel whose status exceeded normal supply chain protocols. His experienced eyes noted Chen's professional bearing and the way Rodriguez treated her with deference that suggested capabilities beyond her apparent rank and assignment. Chen stepped forward, her uniform properly positioned and her bearing impeccably military despite the confrontation that had tested every aspect of her training and restraint. The fabric concealed the Death Brigade tattoo once again, but its revelation had fundamentally altered the power dynamics of the entire base in ways that would ripple outward through unofficial channels. Standard marksmanship qualification ammunition, Staff Sergeant Williams, she stated formally, her voice carrying the same measured professionalism that had marked her responses throughout the crisis. 200 rounds of 55V6 NATO specification, with appropriate targeting materials for distance qualification. Williams nodded respectfully, recognizing something in her tone that demanded careful attention despite her apparent junior status. Consider it done, Sergeant. Priority processing means you'll have everything within the hour. His fingers moved across his requisition tablet with practiced efficiency, ensuring that her request received the kind of attention normally reserved for urgent operational requirements. The desert wind had died down to barely a whisper, as if the confrontation had exhausted the very atmosphere surrounding the supply depot. Heat shimmer continued to rise from the metal surfaces of vehicles and equipment, but the oppressive tension that had marked the harassment attempt had dissipated completely, replaced by the routine efficiency of military logistics operating as designed. Chen's dark eyes surveyed the area where her tormentors had attempted to strip away both her uniform and her dignity, finding only empty space and settling dust where Voss, Morrison, and Liu had learned lessons about assumptions and consequences. The knowledge that their behavior would be documented in files they would never see provided its own form of justice. Rodriguez remained nearby, his presence serving as both protection and endorsement of Chen's status within the base hierarchy. Word would spread through unofficial channels about the incident, carrying with it warnings about treating personnel with respect regardless of apparent rank or assignment. The military grapevine operated with ruthless efficiency when it came to matters of survival and career preservation. If there's nothing else you require, Sergeant Chen, Rodriguez said formally, his tone carrying the respect due to someone whose training exceeded his own understanding and whose operational history remained sealed in classified files beyond his clearance level. Your ammunition will be ready for pickup within the hour, with my personal guarantee of quality and completeness. Chen nodded her acknowledgement, recognizing the professional courtesy and the underlying message that competent authority would ensure her future interactions at the base proceeded without harassment or delay. The demonstration of her capabilities had served its purpose, establishing respect through strength rather than demanding it through regulation or complaint. "Thank you, Master Sergeant," she replied, her voice carrying gratitude that extended beyond the immediate logistic support to encompass the fair treatment and professional recognition that had restored proper military order to a situation that could have escalated beyond anyone's control. As Chun walked away from the supply depot, her boots crunching across the gravel with the same measured precision that had marked her approach hours earlier, the desert heat seemed less oppressive and the weight of concealed capabilities felt more like armor than burden. The Death Brigade tattoo remained hidden beneath regulation fabric, but its impact had transformed the entire social environment of the base. Williams watched her departure with growing curiosity about the woman who had somehow commanded such immediate respect from Rodriguez, a master sergeant known for his professional standards and reluctance to show deference to anyone below flag rank. The mystery would fuel speculation for weeks, adding to the legend of personnel whose true capabilities remained hidden behind standard military facades. The afternoon sun continued its relentless assault on the forward operating base, but the supply depot had returned to its normal rhythm of logistics and routine administration. Only the lingering scent of fear and the echo of lessons learned too late marked the location where 3 soldiers had discovered that assumptions about strength and capability could prove more dangerous than enemy fire. If this story moved you, drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment or what resonated most with you. Have you ever witnessed someone reveal hidden strength when it mattered most, or experienced a situation where appearances proved completely deceiving? Share your thoughts about courage that comes from unexpected places.